So in this part of kefir, we have just finished the sales budget, the production budget, the materials budget, the labor budget, and the overhead budget for the first 6 months of the year, even though I extended it out for a full year. And this was just for kefir. We haven't gotten into the potential sales mix of some kefir and some cheese. We will do that in a little bit. And now what we want to do is go ahead and create income statements. We've got two different formats. We have the traditional format, sales, cost of sales, gross profit, and then selling and administrative costs down to operating income. And then we have a contribution margin income statement, which has sales less all the variable cost to get you down to a contribution margin subtotal and then the fixed cost. All right, well, before we can get cost of goods sold, we have to know what the cost per unit is so that we can multiply the cost per unit times the unit sold to get the cost of goods sold. So let's figure that out. So materials for kefir is going to be 3 gallons times the cost per gallon. Labor for kefir is 0.4 hours times 14 per hour. And overhead, we have to compute. So there's a little bit of flexibility here in what you want to do. It would be pretty unusual to compute a different predetermined overhead rate for every month, one for January, one for February, and so forth. You could do it for the full year if you extended out all the amounts for the full year. I'm going to do it for the first 6 months. So I'm going to get the overhead for 6 months. So I'm going to add up January through June. My formula stopped. Let's try that again. January through June. So that's the total overhead for 6 months. And then the direct labor hours for those same months. All right, and so the overhead per direct labor hour will be $13.70. So the overhead for kefir will be how many labor hours? 0.4 times this overhead charge per hour. So my budgeted cost per unit for a case of kefir is this $21.58. So now I can create my first income statements. The sales we did up here, our sales budget. And the cost of goods sold, so it would be this cost per unit times however many units we sold. So now I need to lock down the relative reference on the cost per unit. And gross profit is sales minus cost of goods sold. All right, let's make sure that's all looking good. All right, and then we can get the first 6 months as a full number. All right, and so for selling and administrative costs, we have fixed selling and admin, and then we have 2 variable admin, the commissions, and then this other variable admin that they don't describe. Okay, so fixed selling and admin, $60,000. Variable admin is $1.30 per case. All right. So how many cases did we sell in that month? All right, and we better lock these babies down. Turn them into absolute references. And then the commissions are 20% times the sales price, okay? Sales. All right, now let's lock that down. So then operating income will be your gross profit minus your selling and administrative expenses. Oh, a loss. Oh, that's some sad news. All right, let's see. Did we lock everything down? Looks like we did, so this should go all the way across. And then we can copy our formula there and drag it across. Okay, so let's do the contribution margin income statement. And the judgment about which format your client would best understand probably can't be made until there's some insights about what's going on here. Right now we see a loss, but let's do the contribution margin income statement. So the sales is the same under both formats. All right, so the materials would be your materials per unit times the units sold. Your labor is your labor per unit times the units sold. Then your supplies and packing per case times cases sold. Other variable overhead, which is per labor hour, times cases sold. Variable administrative, we have that from above. Amazon commissions, we have that from above. Okay, so then the total variable costs, add those all up, and then the contribution margin would be the sales minus the total variable cost. All right, add everything up, and then our formulas will work. All right, so then fixed overhead, and fixed selling administrative from above. Okay, let's anchor this down. Okay, so total fixed cost for each month, and then operating income will be your contribution margin minus your fixed cost. Oh, hang on here, we got an issue with labor. What did we do? We just took the labor hours times units sold and didn't do it times the cost per hour. So let's fix that. Where's our cost per hour? There we go. All right. So the loss is not quite the same between the two formats. Why not? This requires some pretty advanced thinking. There's a volume variance. What do I mean? In the contribution margin format income statement, I put the entire fixed overhead in here. In the traditional, I used applied overhead. So the fixed overhead that's in here is not the full 85,000 because it went to all the units produced. It went across direct labor hours incurred, which would include the units in ending inventory. So there is a little bit of fixed overhead in the units that were produced but not sold. And so the loss is a little bigger when I include all of the fixed overhead than when I only include the fixed overhead on the units sold. So that's pretty fancy. Why don't I have other variances? Because this is still budget and I don't have any actual to compare it to. If I had actual to compare to budget, then I might have some variances due to material cost and material usage and labor cost and labor efficiency and so forth. And that's coming in kefir 2, but not in kefir 1. But I do have a volume variance. It's pretty tiny because there's not a lot of difference between units made and units sold. So the amounts are relatively small. And it's good conceptually to understand why are they there. They are probably not something important to your client. It's just important for you to make sense of why is there a difference between the two different formats of the income statement in this particular situation. Oftentimes in chapter 3 and the earlier chapters, when they're keeping things pretty simple, they won't have a difference between the two because they won't have created a predetermined overhead rate and spread it to units produced and then only use units sold in the traditional income statement. So anyway, the difference is relatively small, but that's what it is. So we have a loss. It's pretty steady. There's not the loss is going down just a little bit every month. Why? Because sales are going up a little bit every month. In this case, that they've assumed a 1% improvement in sales growth. And when you're playing around and giving advice to your client, it may make some sense for you to come back and, let's say, change it to 2%. What happens to your loss if you change it to 2%? Okay, and so that's one of the advantages. I'm going to put this back here. That's one of the advantages to having linked everything to the assumptions, is you can move the assumptions around and come back and see what has happened to your results. And sometimes that helps you to advise your client that no matter what you change that profit growth to, you're still at a loss. Even if I change this to 5%, 6%, something that would be unrealistic, I still can't get rid of your loss. Okay, so that means I've got to do something other than try to grow my way out of it. Okay, so I have some sort of other problem, and is it fixable? And you would start thinking through how to solve your client's problems. Okay, so there is your income statement in the two different formats. The next thing that we're going to do is do another budget similar to the budget that we did in the first video, but this time we're going to have a sales mix between kefir and cheese, which is based on this cell down here. What percentage of the kefir is being converted into cheese, and how will that change the budget, and then of course the new income statements. So we'll do that. We'll work on that in the next video.